Hey guys, welcome back to more political chatter. Today we will be talking about the state of the 2026 midterm elections and how Democrats are quickly approaching a much better position for these next elections than they were, by the time of the 2024 race just a few months ago. So we do have some news about each individual competitive Senate race. And all of it is really good news for the Democrats. It puts new light, new hope into these campaigns. They are still heavily unfavored to take back control of the Senate. This is my current prediction that you're looking at now. I think that they flip North Carolina and they flip Maine, which we're about to get to. Right now, they have 47 Senate seats. That would put them at 49, but Republicans are still at 51. To get majority, not only would they have to flip a state like Ohio with, say, Sherrod Brown, they're still only at 50 seats. Without the vice presidency, they would have to get another seat. Who would that be? Honestly, probably next, most likely, is or even Dan Osborne can't win in Nebraska because he's independent. But next most likely would honestly be Iowa, and that is such an insane stretch. So they virtually have no chance of reclaiming the Senate. But the margin does matter. If you remember, earlier this year, during the confirmation votes for the Trump cabinet positions, there were a lot of close votes. Who was it? I believe it was RFK Jr. I think. I could be wrong in that. But one of them was 50-50. And JD Vance had to come in and break the tie. Sorry, it was Pete Hegseth. It was Pete Hegseth for defense secretary. His vote was 50-50. So my point is the margin matters. Even if Democrats can't reclaim the Senate, it is a massive difference to be down by 6 seats as they are now to only be down by 2. If you have someone dissent, like, Rand Paul has been dissenting a lot lately from the Trump votes. Mitch McConnell has. If you have a couple Republicans dissenting, then it matters so much to only be down by 2 seats rather than 6 like they are now. So to see these gains that Democrats are making across the board in these competitive races in 2026 really does matter a lot when it comes to blocking Donald Trump's agenda if that is what they're trying to do. For example, we had news a couple days ago that the popular former governor of New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, a Republican, will not run for the Senate seat in New Hampshire as many had expected. As you can see, Trump had hoped. Again, he was a former popular governor. This is an open seat. We don't have an incumbent. This could have been a great pickup opportunity for the Republicans there. But not only that, it's not only on the GOP side. Well, here's another actual example on the GOP side, but it even extends into the Democratic fields. In Georgia, it looks more and more likely that Brian Kemp will not run for Senate. Is it likely? I have no idea. Honestly, I don't want to put any chances on whether or not Brian Kemp runs for Senate. He is also the popular Republican governor of the state of Georgia. He would be probably the favorite to win the seat, but that would still be a competitive race against John Ossoff. But in Georgia, the governor Brian Kemp, who just a couple months ago was so heavily expected to run. I mean, it was almost a no question because we had polls come out. This seat looked his for the taking. And now it looks like there are some reports circulating that he really is not so sure about this run. In fact, there were some reports a month or two ago about him more looking closely at a 2028 presidential bid, which would be quite interesting coming from Brian Kemp, but not positive for his own political ambitions. I'd say a Senate seat is much more likely than becoming the president of the United States. Now on the Democratic field, Democrats, not only are apparently blocking some of these popular Republicans from running, but they're also getting their strongest field of candidates to run as well. In Georgia, of course, you have John Ossoff, the incredibly popular governor in Georgia. On the flip side, in North Carolina, you have Tom Tillis, the Republican incumbent running for re-election, who a approval rating poll was just released today. Actually, he is like underwater by like 15 or 20 points in North Carolina, a Republican state that Donald Trump won. So you have a horrible Republican candidate in North Carolina, and that brings me to the Democratic potential candidate in North Carolina, Roy Cooper. Now, he is another extremely popular former governor of a swing state. He was a Democrat. He stepped down in 2024. He didn't run for reelection. And he is now more than looking at a Senate bid, it is almost sure. It was like what Brian Kemp was looking like a couple months ago, where it seemed like it would be a sure thing that he would run for Senate. That is Roy Cooper's situation now. He is almost certainly going to run. There is every indication that he is running. He has publicly expressed interest in running for the Senate seat. He has, even to reporters, he has made it very, he has made it sound very likely that he will run. And you never do that. Politicians never ever do that unless they are actually running. That is something to always keep in mind. So it looks extremely likely that the governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper, runs such a strong candidate, especially against someone who's even unpopular among Republicans like Tom Tillis. Tom Tillis is called a rhino, right? Not a true conservative. And honestly, these MAGA individuals who vote more on vibes than how conservative or liberal someone is, they vote more on messaging. And a lot of these MAGA voters in North Carolina who hate Tom Tillis, have been told Tom Tillis is a rhino. I could honestly 100% see a good chunk of them voting for Roy Cooper. Now, I have this as a tilt rating just because I'm considering all factors right now, like if Roy Cooper will run at all, and if Tom Tillis will survive a primary challenge. Honestly, a primary challenger who beats Tillis in the primary might be even stronger in the general election than the incumbent Tillis himself. So it's a whole combination of factors. But what I'm saying is that if it is Tom Tillis versus Roy Cooper in the general election, it will be a lot more than a tilt margin for Roy Cooper. He would absolutely crush Tom Tillis, and I have no doubt in my mind. So, again, I think they hold Georgia with considering that John Ossoff is an extremely strong candidate, the incumbent, and that it looks more and more likely that Brian Kemp will, in fact, not run for Senate. I have North Carolina flipping, of course, because you have such a weak incumbent Republican and such a strong Democrat. I have Maine. I've talked about Maine, mostly because this is a Trump midterm. This is Susan Collins there in Maine running for re-election. She won by 8 in 2020. I don't see it. A presidential election would actually help her in this case, even though she was on the ballot with Biden, the Democrat, and Biden won Maine by 8 points, while she also won by 8 points. You'd think that would hurt her, but in a midterm election, you're driving out Democrats to vote for Democrats, not driving out, these independent, nonpartisan voters to vote for who they like just to vote, just to do their civic duty. In a midterm election, you're going to have Democrats turn out in droves. Then you have New Hampshire. This one shouldn't even be close without Chris Sununu. That seat will be picked up by Chris Pappas, a representative, U.S. representative who is a Democrat. In Michigan, by the way, that looks like it will be, we don't really know what's going on in Michigan. It should be a very nasty and competitive Democratic primary. On the Republican, it looks like it's either going to be Tudor Dixon, a failed 2022 candidate, or Mike Rogers, a failed 2024 Senate candidate. So I don't think that Republicans are looking at Michigan with too much hope, but it is always a possibility. Undeniable, though, right now that does lean towards the Democrats. But maybe most stunning of all, and maybe, maybe this is what gives Democrats the most hope out of all these races, is the state of Nebraska that we never talked about before 2024, but in 2024 we started to because we had an independent candidate for Senate, Dan Osborne, endorsed by the Nebraska Democratic primary, meaning the Democratic Party of Nebraska did not put up a candidate. They simply did not run a candidate in this race. Therefore, all the Democrats voted for this independent Dan Osborne. He's a local union labor leader. He is a populist. He is a Bernie Sanders style progressive. You wouldn't know that by the way he campaigns because he campaigns as a populist who supports good things, which tells you a lot about the political ideology and policies of people to the likes of Bernie Sanders. So, anyway, in 2024, you had Dan Osborne run for Senate, and on election night, there was, I'm not going to say there wasn't any attention on the race. I certainly was very attentive when it came to the race. But when the election results were coming in, and it was looking like a disaster for Democrats and liberals and progressives down ballot. It was really surprising to see how close Dan Osborne got. He got within 7 points of the Republican incumbent in this race, who was running for what, third or maybe fourth, it was third or fourth term, Deb Fischer. This is just another do nothing Republican, who is just a yes man vote. She's a woman, I know. But yes man in the term, in the characterization. Republican voter every single time just votes with the party, an extremely corrupt individual when it comes to stock trading, just blatantly corrupt. This is your typical politician. This is your typical Republican senator who takes in millions and millions from APAC, the Israel lobby, who takes millions and millions from the pharmaceutical companies, big pharma. So she obviously won't vote to lower the cost of health coverage of pharmaceuticals from the health insurance lobby, from the insurance lobby in general, from the gun lobby, from the RNA. She's not going to do anything about guns. Just the most classic Republican senator you could possibly think of. That was Deb Fischer. And Dan Osborne with this popular, or I should say populist, that's the better term, with this progressive, populist, labor oriented uprising in Nebraska, he got within 7 points. If this was in Ohio, Dan Osborne would be senator right now. If this was in Iowa, Dan Osborne would be senator right now. It just happened to be that he ran in his home state of Nebraska because he's not a carpetbagger and he's going to run where he lives and cares about his community. And it just so happens that Nebraska is one of the most Republican states in the country, and just that partisanship did not allow Dan Osborne to win. Well, there is good news for us Osborne supporters. He released a poll. Well, I should clarify first by saying he's going to run again. He formed a quote-unquote exploratory committee. He's going to run again. And a new poll that he has conducted shows him 1 point behind Pete Ricketts, the Republican incumbent here. Now, this is going to be a much different race than 2024. Why? Because Dan Osborne is now easily a statewide known figure. He proved himself to be an electoral beast in 2024, outrunning Kamala Harris by what? 15, 16, 17 points. Outrageous numbers. And to see them already tied, another big difference is that he's starting earlier. He started at right at the beginning of he started at the beginning of 2024 last time around, and nobody knew this guy. But now he's starting off with a base of support nationwide, where he has supporters all across the country donating to his campaign, being interested in his campaigns that he runs, and he's already essentially tied in his internal poll behind Pete Ricketts at 1%, or by 1%, 45 to 46, 9% undecided. And take note of the, even subtle things like the color association with each candidate. Dan Osborne is the independent. He uses red. Pete Ricketts is the Republican. He gives Pete Ricketts blue. He does everything in his power to falsify this notion that he is some leftist. Even though he definitely is a leftist, he can't run that type of campaign. He can't call himself a progressive or a liberal or a Democrat or a leftist in Nebraska. But he runs on what he believes in. And it's interesting that that is successful. It makes you think a lot. So looking at these 2026 races, Nebraska could be interesting. But the thing about Nebraska is you got to think about the math here. Because let's say Democrats flip Ohio. That adds a Democratic seat and subtracts a Republican seat. That puts them at 50-50. Say they somehow win Iowa. Obviously, they don't. Again, that adds a Democratic seat, subtracts a Republican seat. So then they have majority. But let's just say Republicans keep on to Iowa, as they are doing in my prediction. But let's say Democrats win Ohio somehow. I don't know. I'm just using this as an example to show why this case in Nebraska is important. Because if you have it 50-50, it's not a Democrat winning in Nebraska, and therefore Democrats at 51, Republicans at 49. No, it's Dan Osborne winning, an independent who would make sure not to vote for the Democrats every time so he could be electorally viable in 2020. When would it be? 2032. That's insane. But yeah, 2032 would be his next election. He has to make sure, right, that he doesn't vote for the Democrats every single time because he would lose in the next election given the partisan state of our politics. So he definitely wouldn't caucus with the Democrats, and he has said that multiple times. Again, that would be political suicide. But instead, that would be, let's use toss-up to characterize independent Dan Osborne here, that lowers the Republican seat number, but Democrats don't have a majority. So every single vote would come down to, looking forward to 2026, every vote would come down to Dan Osborne. If it, again, this is if Democrats win Ohio, I'm just using it as an example. Because you don't have Democrats taking that Nebraska seat, you only have Republicans losing that Nebraska seat. Democrats are not adding, only Republicans are subtracting. So if Democrats need to pass a bill, they have their 50 seats, they would have to get Dan Osborne on their side. If Republicans have to pass a bill, they would have to get Dan Osborne on their side. And then that's 50-50. Then they would have fans cast that tie-breaking vote. So very interesting situation here, but it is not over for the Democrats by any means. Again, that would be a really good situation for the Democrats if they had that, except Ohio is extremely unlikely. So that's where things stand right now. I hope you all enjoyed this video. More videos to come. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you all next time.